for your testimony, Chief. We have a question from the Vice Chair.
Thank you for coming today virtually and for your service. I wanted to ask you a question because you're the front line of this, the issues that we're trying to solve. Have you experienced a lot of people with mental health issues on the street that are also behaving in ways that are like a nuisance to others?
Yes, we have, for sure.
And have you been able to use the Involuntary Commitment Act when people are behaving in that way?
We have at times, yes.
I'm just curious what you would think about a system where if people couldn't stop using their substances, they would be treated with involuntary commitment instead of taken to jail.
Well, I think that that's a possibility. And if you're referring to laws such as Ricky's Law that went into effect a couple of years ago, we do try to utilize that when we can, but there are a lot of issues with capacity and issues with DCRs and challenges meeting some of those thresholds. But certainly accessing and leveraging the ITA laws could certainly help in some of these circumstances. Okay,
thank you.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for the answer. And thanks for your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. I was just curious, what do you think about, a 50-year-old man in his house doing some LSD? Mm-hmm. Yep. Do you feel like that should be illegal?
I think it should be illegal because I think that us continuing to send a strong message of encouraging addiction and encouraging drug use is an important part of this. As somebody in law enforcement, that's something I've always felt strongly about. But again, I think getting back to sort of what I was referencing in terms of people experiencing addiction and it changing their lives, that's part of this balance as we look at this moving forward.
And I'm just curious, then why wouldn't you think that somebody drinking a martini in their house, a 50-year-old man drinking a martini in his house, right, because lots of people have alcoholism too, and I'm thinking it's only about 20% of the people that actually use drugs that become addicted, right? So I'm curious, what's the difference between a hit of acid if you're not bothering anyone else in your home?
No, I understand.
And a martini. I'm just curious how law enforcement thinks about that.
Thank you. The reality is that the issue of legalization, decriminalization of drugs has been a critical issue in our society for decades. And we've continued to wrestle with this as a society, and we place law enforcement in the middle. And we are working to get people healthy. Mm-hmm. We're working to keep people safe and to ensure public safety, and that's the balance we have to strike. There's not a simple answer to the question you just asked.
Okay.
But I think this bill attempts to get to a balanced approach to some of those approaches you talked about.
One more.
Okay, just the last question. So do you really think the problem we are trying to solve with this new law that is going to impact the 50-year-old in his house if he does come across law enforcement, or a college kid and all these other people, do you really think it's the 20% that are living with addiction and maybe a smaller percentage of the people that are actually living unhoused that we're making this whole policy for?
I think that that's certainly a critical part of it, let's be frank. That's part of the consideration of public policy that's in front of all of you. Mm-hmm. And again, as I said, this issue of what should become a criminal issue versus what is a health issue, that's part of that difficult conversation that we're having right now and that you are having as elected representatives, in my opinion, as a longtime law enforcement, as a person in law enforcement as long as I have been. I do feel that there's a good balance in the bill as it is right now. You and I, Representative, have had this conversation in other contexts, and I appreciate your perspective a great deal. I really do. I feel that this bill has the right approach.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Chair Rickman.
To ask you, when I got my Blake conviction in 2011, I wanted to do drug court, but I wasn't allowed to. You are not allowed to, even if you're out on a mountain hunting and you have a gun, and legally you have a gun, right? And you had a little bit of meth on you or something. There were so many eligibility criteria where people were excluded from drug court based on if they had a previous violent conviction 10 years ago, or there was a firearm, even if it was lawfully in their possession. Can you tell me what the eligibility criteria is now for Blake convictions for drug possession?
Well, in terms of the Superior Court level drug courts, of course, we don't have any drug possession cases post-Blake.
Yeah.
And I will say, I really appreciate you raising this topic because it is one that drug courts across the state are looking at. nationally, we know that there are recommendations about who drug courts can effectively serve, and we are being encouraged, and I think in Washington State very much have done this, to look at taking more charges and not having exclusionary background criteria, which is an equity and inclusion issue. And it also means that drug courts aren't able to work with people that they would be effective with. And so, drug court eligibility criteria is governed by, I think it's statute 2.30, therapeutic court. So there's certain serious violent charges that we can't take, but there's a lot of discretion, within that in terms of what someone can have in their background. And that's actually a conversation that drug courts statewide are having post-Blake. I know many of us have updated our eligibility criteria post-Blake, and we are taking many of those things that you spoke about into consideration.
Okay, maybe we can help.
Thank you. Yes.
That'd be great.
Thanks very